You know that feeling when you're at a gathering and someone mentions retirement planning and you suddenly become very interested in your phone because you're not entirely sure you could explain what's in your retirement account or if you even have one? Maybe you've been avoiding opening those investment statements that arrive quarterly because you're afraid the number will either be embarrassingly small or worse, smaller than it was last time you checked. Perhaps you've lain awake calculating how much you'd need to save monthly to retire at some reasonable age, and the number you arrived at seemed so impossibly large that you just decided to worry about it later. Later keeps becoming now, and you're still not sure if you're on track, behind, or so far off course that you should just accept you'll be working until you're 80 years old. Here's what most financial benchmarks won't acknowledge about savings by age. The neat formulas and tidy milestones published by financial institutions bear almost no resemblance to how real people actually build wealth over their lifetimes. Understanding what people actually have saved at different ages, not what some retirement calculator says they should have, changes everything about how you evaluate your own financial progress. My name is Anderson, and I help people understand that financial benchmarks are guides, not judgments, and that your specific path matters more than comparing yourself to some theoretical average. If you're wondering whether you're behind, on track, or ahead with your savings, and want to understand what these numbers actually mean for your future, stay with me through this. Subscribe if this kind of realistic financial perspective helps you navigate these questions. Now, when you think about savings benchmarks by age, what framework are you using? Are you comparing yourself to those charts published by investment firms showing you should have 1 times your salary saved by 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50? Or are you just hoping you're not doing worse than everyone else while having no concrete sense of what everyone else actually has? Here's the contrarian insight that's going to change how you think about this. The financial industry has created these tidy benchmarks, suggesting you should have specific multiples of your salary saved by certain ages. Fidelity, one of the largest investment firms, recommends having 1 times your annual salary saved by 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, and 10 times by 67. Sounds straightforward, right? Save 15% of your income starting at 25, invest reasonably, and you'll hit these targets without difficulty. But here's what these recommendations don't tell you. They assume you start saving at 25 with stable income, never experience job loss, never face major medical expenses, never help family members financially, and never encounter any of the financial disruptions that characterize actual human lives. They also assume you're comfortable retiring at 67, which many people find problematic when they consider they might not have the health or energy to enjoy retirement the way they imagined. The reality is substantially messier and, honestly, more interesting than these standardized recommendations suggest. So, let's examine what's actually happening in the real world, decade by decade, starting with your 20s. Your 20s are theoretically the time when you're young, financially constrained, and figuring out how life works. But according to financial experts, you should still be saving aggressively because every dollar you save in your 20s is worth significantly more than dollars saved in your 40s or 50s. It's basic compound growth mathematics. The earlier you invest, the more time that money has to multiply. But let's be realistic about what 20-somethings are actually navigating. You've got educational debt that feels like a second rent payment, entry-level salaries barely covering basic living costs in most metropolitan areas, and cultural messages constantly suggesting you should optimize your youth rather than obsess about retirement 40 years away. The average household headed by someone between 25 and 34 years old earns approximately $85,000 annually after taxes. That might sound reasonable until you recognize that's household income, potentially including a partner's earnings, and it's after taxes, meaning gross income is substantially higher. Using the traditional 50-30-20 budgeting framework that financial advisors promote, you should be saving 20% of income. For someone earning that average, That's approximately $17,000 yearly, or roughly $1,400 monthly. When I was in my 20s, finding $1,400 extra dollars every month felt about as realistic as discovering I could fly. Here's what's actually occurring with people in their 20s. Most are focused on financial survival while establishing their careers. They're managing student loan payments, high housing costs, and the reality that entry-level positions often don't compensate enough to cover basic living expenses, let alone substantial savings. But here's the element that might surprise you. Those who do manage to save even modest amounts in their 20s are establishing themselves for massive advantages later. Consider this scenario. Michael starts saving just $400 monthly at age 26 and continues until 65. Assuming 7% annual returns, he'll accumulate over $1 million at retirement. Meanwhile, if he waits until 36 to begin saving and contributes $800 monthly, he'll only reach approximately $700,000. Starting earlier with less money consistently beats starting later with more money every single time. But let's be honest about actual numbers. Recent data shows people in their 20s who maintain retirement accounts typically have less than $15,000 saved. That's nowhere near the recommended one-time salary by 30, but it's also not nothing. The key insight here is that most 20-somethings who are saving anything at all are ahead of their peers, even if they're behind theoretical benchmarks. The truth about your 20s is that it's less about hitting specific dollar amounts and more about establishing habits that will serve you for decades. Learning to live below your means, automating your savings, and understanding basic investing principles are worth more than any specific balance. If you can master these disciplines in your 20s, you'll be substantially ahead of people who wait until their 40s to become serious about money. Moving into your 30s, this is where things become genuinely complicated and honestly overwhelming for most people. Your 30s are often when life presents its biggest financial challenges simultaneously. You might be contemplating property purchase, which requires a down payment easily exceeding $50,000. You might be starting a family, which introduces costs that can be staggering. Childcare alone can exceed many people's housing costs. Meanwhile, you're supposedly accumulating 3 times your annual salary for retirement by age 40. For someone earning the average income of approximately $109,000 for people aged 35 to 44, that means having roughly $327,000 saved for retirement. When you're managing mortgage payments, childcare costs, and all the expenses accompanying adult life establishment, saving that much can feel impossible. Here's where the gap between recommendations and reality becomes stark. The average person in their 30s actually has approximately $200,000 in retirement savings, which sounds substantial until you recognize that's only for people who have retirement accounts. Many people in their 30s are still building emergency funds, eliminating student debt, or managing other financial priorities that make retirement savings feel like a luxury they can't afford. What's genuinely happening in your 30s is a financial balancing act. You're attempting to balance immediate needs like housing and potentially childcare with long-term objectives like retirement savings. You're navigating career advancement that might require additional education or training investments. You might be supporting aging parents while considering your own children's future education expenses. The people who succeed financially during their 30s aren't necessarily the ones hitting every benchmark perfectly. They're the ones staying consistent with savings even when life becomes expensive and complicated. They might not be saving 15% of income every single month, but they're contributing something to retirement accounts regularly, building emergency funds gradually, and making conscious decisions about major expenses. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call David, because his experience illustrates these principles clearly. David entered his 30s with $38,000 in retirement savings and $72,000 in student loan debt. He was earning $75,000 annually as a project manager, feeling reasonably good about his trajectory. At 32, David married someone with similar debt and income. Together, they bought a modest house, stretching their budget more than financial advisors would recommend. For 3 years, David essentially made minimal progress on retirement savings. He was maintaining, not advancing. At 35, David changed companies for a significant salary increase to $95,000. He immediately increased his retirement contribution to 12%, even though it felt uncomfortable initially. By 38, David had accumulated $160,000 in retirement accounts despite those stagnant years. He hadn't hit every benchmark perfectly, but he'd maintained forward momentum despite life's complications. David's story demonstrates something crucial about your 30s. You're going to have periods of tremendous progress, periods of barely maintaining position, and periods where you slide backward despite your best efforts. The objective isn't perfection across every month or year. The objective is maintaining overall trajectory across the entire decade, despite inevitable turbulence. Let's discuss your 40s, which is where things become genuinely interesting and honestly somewhat concerning for many people. Your 40s are supposedly your peak earning years, when you finally have your financial situation organized and you're progressing smoothly toward comfortable retirement. The benchmark suggests you should have 6 times your annual salary saved by 50. For someone earning the average income of approximately $116,000 for people in their 40s, that's nearly $700,000 in retirement savings. Here's where I'm going to share numbers that might comfort or concern you depending on your current position. The average person in their 40s has approximately $400,000 in retirement savings. That's substantial money by any measure, but it's still short of that 6 times salary target. What's more revealing is that this average includes people with very high balances, meaning plenty of people in their 40s have significantly less than $400,000 saved. Your 40s are often when reality crystallizes about retirement planning. You start calculating and recognizing that retirement isn't some distant abstract concept anymore. It's something that could theoretically occur in 20 years, which sounds extensive until you realize decades pass faster than anticipated. This is when people experience what I call the financial reckoning about their savings. But here's what's actually happening during your 40s that makes this decade so financially complex. Many people are still managing mortgages on homes purchased in their 30s. They might have children in high school or college, introducing expenses rivaling mortgage payments. College costs have expanded to the point where many families choose between funding their retirement and funding their children's education. It's like being asked to choose between your future self and your children, which represents an impossible choice for most parents. Simultaneously, your 40s are often when you start considering aging parents who might need financial assistance or care. You're potentially positioned between supporting your children and supporting your parents, all while attempting to save for your own retirement. Yet, despite these competing priorities, something interesting occurs for many people in their 40s. They start becoming serious about money in ways they never have previously. Maybe it's because retirement feels more tangible, or maybe it's because they finally reached income levels making substantial savings possible. Whatever the reason, your 40s are often when people make their biggest wealth-building strides. The people who succeed financially in their 40s have usually determined how to increase income while keeping expenses from growing proportionally. They might receive promotions, change jobs for better compensation, or develop additional income streams. They've learned that earning more money doesn't automatically resolve financial challenges if you simply spend more alongside it. Moving into your 50s, this is where accumulated decades of financial decisions begin determining what your retirement will actually look like. You're supposedly accumulating 8 times your annual salary by 60, and retirement is no longer abstract. It's something that could happen in the next 10 to 15 years, meaning your savings need to support you for potentially 25 or 30 years without employment income. The average person in their 50s has over $600,000 saved for retirement, which actually positions them ahead of benchmarks for the first time in decades. This makes sense because your 50s typically represent highest earning years, and they're also when you access catch-up contributions, allowing you to save more in retirement accounts than younger people can. But here's what's genuinely happening in your 50s that makes this such a crucial decade. Many people start thinking seriously about when they want to retire and what that retirement will resemble. Some discover they're positioned for comfortable retirement, while others recognize they need to work longer than planned or dramatically increase savings rates. Your 50s are also when you start confronting harsh realities about aging. Health issues become more common and more expensive. You might start considering long-term care costs, which can easily exceed $100,000 annually. These aren't enjoyable topics, but they're essential for realistic retirement planning. The people who thrive financially in their 50s have usually developed what I call retirement clarity. They possess realistic understanding of what their retirement will cost, when they want to retire, and whether their current savings trajectory will get them there. If there's a gap, they're taking action to close it, whether that means working additional years, reducing expected retirement expenses, or finding ways to dramatically increase savings rates. So here's the reality about savings by age. The benchmarks published by financial institutions represent idealized scenarios that don't match most people's actual lives. The average retirement savings across all age groups for people who actually have retirement accounts is just $65,000. $65,000. And remember, this only includes people who have retirement accounts, excluding approximately 25% of Americans who have nothing saved for retirement. But here's where this becomes genuinely interesting and potentially hopeful if you're feeling behind. The people hitting or exceeding these benchmarks aren't necessarily earning massive salaries or inheriting wealth. They're usually just people who determined a few key principles early and maintain them consistently over time. So there you have it. The truth about savings by age isn't as frightening as financial planning websites suggest, but it's also not as simple as following some standardized formula. Whether you're exceeding benchmarks or feeling substantially behind, remember that your financial journey is uniquely yours. The most important element isn't where you are currently. It's what you do next. Your future self isn't expecting perfection. Your future self is hoping you'll start making reasonably good decisions consistently, even if you feel like you're starting late. And if you can provide that, you'll look back grateful you began when you did, rather than waiting for some perfect moment that never arrives.